This is a radio broadcast addressed from the League of Nations on the global war effort against the Morgana threat, where we report the recent happenings amongst the major nations contributing to the defense of our united front. I am your speaker, Ammaraglio Maus, but you may refer to me as Commissar, or simply the Speaker, whichever you or your government prefers. The fourth week of November is here, and the Zurich Conference came to a close, with the International Naval Protection Force and its newly appointed first captain being talk of the town, so to speak. Alongside that, in a welcome turn of events, nations of the world are taking the fight back to the Morgana instead of their neighbors, though we can't deny the growing tensions still about to boil over. First up, news regarding the League of Nations. The Zurich Conference concluded on the 18th of November, and in less than a month, members of the League and valued associates, even those who had previously severed ties with the organization amid an air of mutual disdain and hostility, set out the principles of an international neutrality fleet, a naval force representing all of humanity against a common threat, and the first rules by which it would be organized. They named the first captain of the fleet, the hero of the Battle of Skagerrak, the savior of Rotterdam, the unifier of the first great proto-neutrality fleet, and most tellingly, the officer with the highest number of confirmed Morgana kills. The captain promptly accepted the position and the new duties, then raced off to the next battle without hesitation. In the weeks prior, there was much debate regarding the rules and stipulations of an international neutrality fleet. However, all sides came to an agreement. The League has put together a summary of the major points, of which I will be reading now. Following the conclusion of the Zurich Conference on the 18th of November, it was resolved that humanity as a whole was under sustained and arbitrary attack by unknown and unnatural naval forces, that certain man-made warships have manifested human-like avatars uniquely capable of defending against certain forms of the enemy's chemical and exotic offensive capabilities, that these avatars are able to express free will, and that their concentration on the common enemy is essential to the common defense, and that for the common defense of the whole of humanity and the preservation of international trade, an international naval protection force will be created with the purpose of repulsing the enemy and investigating its origins. Consistent with these resolutions, the signatory states herewith undertake to implement the following measures. First, the League of Nations will impanel an Admiralty Board, subject to approval as discussed in Appendix A, to coordinate and supervise the actions of the INPF. Second, the Admiralty Board's role will be primarily advisory, and will not generally supersede the directives of national leaders in cases where the two come into conflict. Third, the participating ships will be those and only those possessed of the aforementioned avatars. To be recognized as an avatar, these entities must demonstrate apotropaic qualities in the presence of the enemy's toxic, exotic chemical weapons. They must exert measurable supernatural control over the systems of the ships they represent, and they must be considered in good standing with the nations they serve. Operations taken at the behest of the INPF and consistent with the INPF protocols will not be considered evidence of disloyalty to their home nations. Fourth, in cases where existing chain of command on these vessels is severely disrupted, the avatars of the ships will be allowed a degree of deference in the selection of their commanding officers, pending further review by their nation of origin. Fifth, the creation and operation of the INPF will not invalidate formal or legitimate declarations of war between sovereign nations. Sixth, ships participating in the INPF will not participate in military actions against other human powers. Seventh, ships participating in the INPF will not be subject to undue military interference in the pursuit of their duties. Eighth, ships participating in the INPF will remain the property of their home nations. Ninth, the crews of the INPF vessels may be international in nature, but a simple majority or more of the crew should be citizens of the vessel's parent nation. 10th, available ports and shipbuilding facilities will be open to any INPF vessels in good standing. 11th, INPF vessels may utilize without legal penalty any available weapons or equipment, regardless of national origin, so long as their acquisition is consistent with adjusted international law. See Appendix C for more details. 12th, INPF vessels may be required to contribute to their own upkeep and refits in cases where host ports lack adequate supplies or personnel. 13th, the officer involved with Incident X, the Battle of Rotterdam, and the Battle of the Skagerrak Strait, is hereby to be recognized as the first captain of the fleet of the INPF. Quite the mouthful, isn't it, my dear listeners? But worry not. Everything you just heard is a big step forward toward the ultimate goal of a united front against the Morgana, while simultaneously respecting the wishes of the member and associate nations. Needless to say, hopes are high for the INPF's future prospects. Following that announcement from the League of Nations comes news from the Axis, more specifically the faction's leader, Germany. This week, reports indicate that the undersea raiders were recalled to home after a profitable time at sea. The North Sea Passage was taken at night, and one by one they had little trouble evading the British screens, meaning there were no close calls for anyone involved. This perhaps suggests that passage through the North Sea would be less troublesome as it had been in the past. After that comes news from the Allies. This week, the Allies restored their blockade of the North Sea, but the returning German raiders slipped through without a loss. The frustrated guard ships were left to watch German mercantile traffic steaming uneventfully through the leads in neutral waters. The source of that traffic was Narvik, the terminus of a rail line to Sweden and then Finland. With a war between the Finnish and the Soviets on the horizon, the Allies need access to it in order to follow up their commitments to Finland. However, a delicate diplomacy with the Norwegians was called for if the Allies were to gain access to it. Following the reports from the world's factions comes news from our comrades in the Soviet Union, the sixth contributing nation to our united front. Normally, we deliver each nation's report in order based on their contribution ranking, calculated by the Naval War College. However, there was a mistake last week in which I must apologize for. It was reported in the second week of November that the Soviets were 7th in contribution. However, they were in fact 6th. We here at the station try our hardest to gather factual evidence and sources for our reports, but things can and do slip through the cracks. To make it up to those in the Soviet Union, I'm reporting their national news first and foremost amongst other nations this week, and giving them an extra ooh-ah for all of their efforts. Now, back to the news. As war with Finland seemed to loom ever closer, the Soviets decided that starvation's presence in the area could no longer be tolerated in any capacity. New orders came direct from Moscow, enacting the war plan Mysterious Broadcasts Eliminate, which found 72% support in the Politburo, from which the Soviet Baltic Fleet was ordered to find all of starvation and her forces and destroy them without prejudice. They and the Germans had repeatedly addressed her. Now she would be swept clean from the Baltic. Captains of the Baltic Fleet haunted every incarnation of the ship they could find, and in some cases, sources say, with semi-secret counsel from FNS Väinämöinen, who continued to regard human enemies as much less urgent a problem than that of the Morgana. By midday on November 22nd, it seemed that there wasn't a single starvation sighted east of Bornholm, and Baltic Sea traffic was free to move in a way it hadn't in weeks. Of course, the Germans hadn't all been that happy to see Soviet ships running Morgana down in waters just north of Kolberg, particularly since the Baltic Fleet hadn't notified the Oberkommando der Marine of their maneuver beforehand. While in those waters, reports state the Baltic Fleet observed clear signs of strange constructions of unusual design along the Hel Peninsula. They were emitting a strange vapor, and the climate turned positively balmy as the fleet approached. Study by rangefinder showed no sign of defensive guns or personnel. It is possible that they, and other structures found in the Baltic, were the source of the weather anomalies experienced in this region. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Soviet Union, the Pacific Fleet dealt with still another Morgana trap in Proliv Laperouse. In this case, a fierce sedition group that had been broadcasting what she purported were Japanese troop movements across all radio bands. The Japanese responded with increased intelligence and collaboration on Morgana movements. Newly developed protocols between coast watchers and the navies of the Soviet Union and Japan should prove valuable in the years to come. Following that, we head down into the Mediterranean to hear news from Italy, who continues to set the example as the leading nation combating the Morgana threat. This week, the ships of the Regia Marina, still not fully recovered from their heroic efforts in recent weeks, left their home waters behind following the orders of War Plan lending a hand in which the Regia Marina sought to help the Spanish drive the Morgana force out of the Alboran Sea. Just getting there was an effort of its own, however. A corruption group was waiting for them at Abizia late in the day on the 17th, and the division of avarices that had been fighting over the spoils just south of Cartagena caught up with them early in the morning on the 18th. Along the way, they passed the still smoldering ruins of Palma, where the Morgana had evidently pulled their hulls ashore before returning to the sea. The Armada Española wasn't here, but as the Italians reached Cartagena, they were joined with a division of destroyers and Palma gunboats, led by Almirante Antequera, and they were told a grim tale of the early assault by the Morgana. Late in the morning of the 19th, the Italian fleet encountered the Alboran Morgana's eastern screen south of the Cabo de Gata, and by 1320 the battle was fully joined. The main force was led by vanities, albeit not the ones responsible for the carnage at La Maddalena, and seemed more disciplined than in previous encounters. Their accuracy rapidly began to tell on the Italians in Spanish. Reports state that R.N. Fiume and R.N. Armando Diaz suffered heavy damage from gunfire early in the battle, and R.N. Saeta was sunk. In the late afternoon, however, a lucky magazine hit destroyed the Morgana flagship, and the line began to crumble, beginning with the flight of a division of cowardices. The subsequent pursuit lasted throughout the night, when the Morgana were at last brought to bay by the arrival of the French forced raid. Their unexpected arrival in darkness almost proved disastrous when R.N. Antonio Pigafetta launched a torpedo at M.N. Dunkirk, who loomed unexpectedly out of the black. But fortunately, the torpedoes missed, skimming just a bit forwards of Dunkirk's bow. The final salvos were fired at 0200 hours on November 20th, and the battle, whose sources claim to be the most brutal night battle of the war against the Morgana, ended shortly thereafter. However, the Morgana Despair, known to have operated in the Alboran Sea previously, was not present at the battle. Despite that, it was another triumph to be sure. But when the shooting was done, the fleet had to turn back to east with some speed. New Morgana groups, vanities at that, were appearing in the Aegean Sea, and required immediate attention. Following that comes news from Germany, who, through unprecedented effort, has become the second leading contributor in the war against the Morgana, surpassing even that of the United States. This effort has caught the ire of some nations, but is still quite impressive to say the least. This week, as the Zurich conference closed, the Oberkommando der Marina concluded that there could be advantages to be had in selecting a number of vessels to serve in a distinct Z-Flotta under the command of the INPF-aligned officers and flying the League flag. Sources say this recommendation was not accepted after lengthy debate, however. It was deemed far too dangerous to allow other navies to get too close a look at German ships, operations and tactics, and furthermore, there was no intention to generally reciprocate to Allied ships nominally under the INPF flag. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht stated that they had a better purpose for the Walküren of the fleet anyways. Meanwhile, at Königsberg, a study of the capabilities and natures of German bells ran from the 18th to the 23rd. There, they were subjected to a series of tests, a manifestation range, sensory awareness, stress tolerance, and more that would become the basis for further experimentation, reports state. A volunteer, KMS Deutschland, was given more extensive tests in a separate dock, however. When asked, she would not speak of them, except to note that she was grateful to be of service. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht was reportedly satisfied with the compliance of the Kriegsmarine in these efforts. At sea, the Kriegsmarine took action yet again and devoted every available resource to evacuating the civilian population of Helgoland Island, even as construction workers were shipped in to begin assembling strange new facilities. By November 22nd, construction was well underway, with the cruiser KMS Nuremberg delivering specialists to the island that night. Malice was sighted multiple times watching from a distance, but she was content to watch, and the Kriegsmarine was ordered to keep that distance and not engage to avoid alerting the British in the region. Following that, we head across the Atlantic to hear news from the United States, the third contributing nation against the Morgana threat. A big naval news item this week was the beginning of USS Constitution's grand transit from Boston to the Potomac on November 23rd. The presence of a belle was believed to have been singularly responsible for keeping the Morgana away from Boston Harbor, despite her distinctively unimpressive armaments. And her new position was expected to bring an extra degree of security to the nation's capital, and also be a passionate, articulate voice in favor of Belle Unity and the INPF project to within spitting distance of the hesitant Congress. Most of the week was spent preparing to move her safely, of course. Upon convening, the powers that be within the United States government voted upon and passed the War Plan Atlantic Fleet sedition with an 83% majority. Through this, an honor guard of battleships and cruisers were assembled and traveled with some fanfare towards Boston, while another, less stately force was sent out to eliminate the sedition that had been broadcasting along the coast for weeks. A second group was successful in working through the lesser Morgana squadrons until they were able to track the location of the flagship. This was a sedition her lesser sisters called the Conductor, and she was discovered broadcasting John Philip Salsa marches east of Manhattan. Curiously enough, she didn't make an attempt to defend herself, instead saluting cheekily as she scuttled herself. It was a minor provocation compared to all the rest, but galling all the same. And perhaps sedition had accomplished what she set out to do. Yes, USS Constitution and the Honor Fleet were inspiring a spike in recruitment, but along the East Coast and elsewhere, though perhaps more quietly, people were debating whether American interests were really served by fighting Morgana away from home. And the spirit of the Panama Conference seemed to dim a bit. Despite that, the presence of a large part of the Atlantic Fleet on the East Coast further reduced attacks on merchants, enabling trade to near peacetime levels. Meanwhile, in Havana, some sources say the Morgana machines taken from the Puerto Rican Trench continued to groan and shift in their housings. Sometimes the scientists who studied them swore they were even whispering. Perhaps the United States should be careful seeking the secrets of Pandora's box. Following that comes news from the United Kingdom, who are the fourth contributing member in our united front against the Morgana. Perhaps the most important single British decision of the week involved the Royal Navy only tangentially. The Chamberlain government, pursuing a Fabian strategy against Germany, became clearly aware that time was not necessarily on their side given the impact of the Morgana on trade. After some debate in the Houses of Parliament, Prime Minister Chamberlain announced the enactment of the political play, Question of the Economy, in which the United Kingdom would change its economic policies. The Evening Chronicle provided an excerpt from their paper regarding the announcement. It reads as, quote, "Due to recent events, it would now be deemed necessary to enact more far-reaching price controls and labor reform than had first been anticipated. Further cash and carry would be necessary from the United States," end quote. The changes in policy played directly into the hands of Chamberlain's detractors, and the public German broadcast mocking MI6 about Venlo drove Churchill to a rage. It seems that Chamberlain's popularity as a leader might be beginning to wane. In other news, confirmed intelligence reports from the Morgana researchers at Pembroke the 7th suggested that corruption had captured a large vessel and were building something onto it in the western approaches. This led the 18th Destroyer Flotilla being dispatched in a daring mission to cut it out. The details of the operation have been deemed top secret. Not even my contacts in the SAS would say anything about it. But it is known that HMS Acosta had to go through a rigorous chemical decontamination procedure in the Sea of Ireland before returning to port, including some reported spot burns. This operation in the western approaches was deemed more urgent a priority than Spain's ongoing difficulties in the Alboran Sea, for all the problems they posed to Gibraltar, though the French would intervene there on the Allies' behalf. The mission was even more urgent than the lone Morgana submarine lingering awkwardly close to Brighton, though that wasn't a choice lightly made. Tragically, the AMC Rajputana was sunk by a malice somewhere near the Dover Bank on November 23rd. Although the news had not yet reached Rawalpindi, she flew into a rage at roughly the same time, departing from her planned course to make all speed through her foundering sister. She was able to rescue 19 of Rajputana's crew, but malice hadn't lingered to receive Rawalpindi's wrath. And now for a trip over to East Asia to hear the report from the Empire of Japan, who are the fifth contributing nation to the Morgana war effort. This week, there's not much to report for Japan, as it's back to business for the majority of the Imperial Japanese Navy. With the battle at Formosa won, the Fuzhou perimeter in China was secure, and with a polite nod to the British in Hong Kong, the Imperial Japanese Navy could now deliver troops along the South China Sea to strengthen the garrisons around Shantou, on Hainan, and most importantly, in Guangdong. Manning, China's only remaining direct supply line from the sea, was well invested. The Imperial Japanese Navy continued to offer battle to delusion. Their scouts, fighters, and bombers dueled deeper in the South China Sea against the Morgana carrier. It was dangerous work, but it calmed the region still further and gave the Navy the opportunity to perfect its tactics. The news wasn't entirely good, however. The Morgana fire that had been driven away from the region of Kumijima reappeared near the Bonin Islands, a little worse for wear and very much annoyed with the Japanese. Lastly, but certainly not least, we head back over to Europe to hear the latest from France, the seventh contributing nation to our united front. This week, the Morgana around Spain still continued to wreak havoc along their coast. Franco's pleas for support were heard this time, however, and found 78% support from Delanier's government, who subsequently enacted the war plan forced array in Balearic Sea, heeding the Spanish's call to arms. Late in the afternoon on November 19th, the forced array arrived in the Mediterranean, driving the meandering confusions in the Strait of Gibraltar eastward and smashing into the western screen of the Morgana Alboran Sea Fleet some 20 kilometers south of Marbella. It was reported that Morgana transport hulks, filled with captured Spaniards, were seized as the capital ships continued on to engage a Morgana relief column returning from a bombardment mission. What fate awaited them could only be speculated, but they have thankfully been safely returned home before they could find out. The sun set as the French engaged, and the next few hours saw the complete destruction of the Morgana column, along with 2 squadrons fleeing the Italians to the east. French tactics and Morgana HE shells contributed to very light casualties on the French side, and the largest danger of the evening was surprisingly the arrival of the Italian fleet, who were chasing fleeing Morgana, but were unaware of the disposition of the French. An errant torpedo attack on MN Dunkirk by Arn Antonio Pigafetta might have caused serious damage had the torpedoes not overshot her bow. By 0200 hours on November 20th, the most brutal night battle of the war to date was done, and the Marine Nationale were among the winners. France's relationship with the Spanish regime was unquestionably improved by the assistance, and popular support for the League of Nations improved as well. Of course, the forced array was in the western Mediterranean, and it wasn't chasing Morgana to the Brazilian coast, nor intervening as the enemy gathered near Martinique. And with that concludes the League of Nations War Report for Week 4 of November. We encourage all the nations to continue working together in order to tackle the Morgana threat. Without everyone lending a helping hand, we cannot truly stand united in the face of our new adversary. And as a reminder to all captains and citizens alike that this League of Nations broadcast is intended on keeping you informed about the unified war effort against the Morgana. But there is only something you can do. Yes, you heard right. Only you. Consider purchasing some war bonds to keep our boys and girls on the ocean and across the globe equipped with the latest and greatest so that even the Morgana will think twice before attacking. Doing so will also net you prestige among your peers that you can utilize in a variety of ways. Though if you're a captain looking for more, consider purchasing a League of Nations Commissioner membership card, so that you can gain access to our exclusive network of traders and salvage crews to gain more resources, and the ability to meet with our expert naval training staff and diplomatic envoys to earn more experience for both on and off the battlefield occasions. You will also gain the knowledge of our professional R&D and production centers to build equipment quickly and squish those gremlins even faster. And don't forget to take advantage of our experienced harbor staff for faster refit and repair times. To top it all off, you'll be letting the Bells know who and what you truly support, gaining their adoration that much quicker. Thank you for listening, and may you have smooth seas.